All right, good morning everyone and welcome to eGain. My name is Reem Bazari and I'm the Marketing Manager for the North America region and your host for the webinar today. We are a leading provider of cloud software for multi-channel customer engagement and knowledge management. We've been rated a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for web customer service apps 5 years in a row and #1 on both the vision and the ability to execute in the most recent Magic Quadrant report. This webinar is the second in a series of webinars we're running on digital engagement. The previous webinar focused on video services. The next webinar, which is next week, will be on knowledge. So to focus on today, who works 24/7, engages customers and answers questions in a smart and fun way, gives website tours, pushes relevant web pages, and never calls in sick? The answer is the virtual assistant, or VA. Also called chatbots, avatars, and concierges, VAs help businesses wow customers with a distinctive self-service. They cut service costs and enhance brand quality. Consumers are excited too. In a recent Forrester consumer survey, 28% of respondents said they had used virtual assistants for customer service in 2012. Clearly signaling that this technology is now ready for prime time. RVA is right for you. To present the content for today's webinar, I'm delighted to have with us today Mr. Johan Jacobs. As many of you may know, Johan is an executive consultant and former research director at Gartner. Johan has over 28 years of experience in the global IT industry. He's a world-leading authority on customer relationship management. He has a great deal of expertise in web customer service and is ideally placed to talk about best practice. Johan will be taking questions at the end of the session, so please use the question box if you wish to submit questions during the presentation. But for now, I would like to hand it over to Johan to take us through his presentation.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this very exciting discussion that we are going to host during the next hour or so. My name is Johan Jacobs, and I'm very excited to be talking about virtual assistants. The next slide, please. So, for questions, there is the control panel on the left-hand side of the screen, on the right-hand side. Mm-hmm. You can also use, if you want to, Twitter at eGain, or if you want to contact me directly now or post the discussions, I'm at Bushman 10. The session will be recorded and the links will be sent through to you. So sit tight, hold on to those seats, and let's see how we go through this next hour and explore the wonderful. So if we can have the next slide, please. Now, virtual assistants go by many different names. They are often called virtual agents. They are called chatbots. There's even some people that refer to them as avatars. There's often the use of the word web, IVR, or auto chat. Some people refer to it as speech agents, telepresence assistants, many different words, often for the same thing. But let's dispel a few of those myths this morning and clearly identify what we are not referring to, and then equally try and clarify what a virtual assistant is. If we move to the next slide, please. So let's tackle one of those frequently incorrectly used words, and that is the word of a virtual agent. Now, back in the 90s, Nortel, in fact, released a piece of hardware, a box, a switch, And they refer to that switch as a 9150. That switch allowed an organization to place a few agents at a remote location. And in placing those agents at a remote location, the agents could log on and they would form part of the normal contact center, but they will be sitting remotely. Now, Nortel, at that stage, referred to this as a virtual agent. The virtual agent is, in fact, a real live human being. It is not a remote agent. It's not a virtual assistant, as we would like to refer to it. If we move to the next slide, please. The other word that is often misused is the word avatar. Now, avatar is a digital persona of an individual. Most often we find the avatars in virtual worlds, such as Second Life or many of the others. And it is a representation of an individual, not necessarily a representation of an organization. The avatar will have a discussion box sometimes floating above the head of the avatar. That discussion box will have text, and the text is typed in real life by the avatar's owner. So it is a virtual representation of an individual. Again, we are not talking about avatars because virtual assistants are representations of organizations, of enterprises, not of individuals. Virtual assistants often takes on the persona of that enterprise. And the content that appears in the virtual assistant discussion is the content from a knowledge base, not the content typed by a human being in the background. So we are, in fact, not talking about avatars. Avatar might, at the end of the day, be the digital persona. So what else are we not talking about? If we move to the next slide, please. A very, very exciting world is starting to emerge. And we're not talking about that today, but the world is that of telepresence robots. The picture on the right-hand side of the slide shows an image of some of the first prototypes. The picture on the left-hand side of the slide shows some real live operational models. Now, the telepresence robot is a physical device. It can be in an organization. Often 5, 6, 7, 10 of these telepresence robots can exist. Employees from around the country will take remote control of the telepresence robot. They will drive the robot or navigate it to a person they want to have a meeting with. It can project voice, it can project image. They can even go and park the robot next to a boardroom meeting and be virtually present at the meeting. On the left-hand side, a more modern version of the telepresence robot armed with a tablet-type device, parked in a shopping mall, where you take control of the telepresence robot and you can virtually browse throughout the shopping mall. You can talk to an assistant, and you can seek advice on products, and you can even do some shopping all remotely. Very exciting world, but that is still not a virtual assistant. If we move to the next slide, please. Now, I said virtual assistants are new, but the concept, in fact, are quite old. The concept hail from the 80s. A very, very first virtual assistant prototype was called the Knowledge Navigator. And when you have time post this session, there's a very cool video on YouTube. Go and watch the video on the first prototype of the Knowledge Navigator. What is interesting is that the first occurrence of a virtual assistant was directly linked to knowledge. And knowledge today is probably the most crucial component of virtual assistants. But more of that later. So the virtual assistant, hailing from the 80s, the Knowledge Navigator, a great clip on YouTube. Do yourself a favor and go and look at that virtual assistant video clip. Can we have the next slide, please? So what are we referring to when we talk about the virtual assistant? Well, I will quote here from Gartner. And Gartner has a definition that says the virtual assistant is a conversational interface. Very important that we stop for a minute at the word conversational. That does not imply the using of short keywords. It implies the use of sentences when engaging with the virtual assistant. That simulates a conversation. We should be able to provide the virtual assistant with sentence instructions, whether it is by spoken word, by a voice, or whether it is by written word, by text. There are 4 modes of interacting typically with the virtual assistant. The first is in a text-to-text type mode. We see very popular a text-to-speech, where the virtual assistant will deliver a spoken instruction back or a spoken content. We then see speech-to-text, where the customer will speak to the virtual assistant and it will provide text-based information, such as a statement of your bank account or a map of a region. And then finally, as we see, and many of you are familiar with the iDevice, we see Siri on the iPhone, which is a speech-to-speech virtual assistant. Then next, the virtual assistant incorporates natural language processing. Natural language is really at the heart of the virtual assistant's ability to understand instructions, whether those instructions are in the form of written word or in the form of spoken word. It will have dialogue control and domain knowledge. Now, the domain knowledge is very important when we look at the worlds of virtual assistant. Domain knowledge, if we are dealing with a virtual assistant in a financial services world, then it will have financial services expertise. If we're dealing with one in a travel and tourism world, then it will have its specific domain expertise. The next component is the visual appearance. Many organizations will choose not to have an external image, that avatar out there, but most organizations today, in fact, prefer to portray their organization's profile, the organization's image, through the virtual assistant. And I'll show you some examples. That appearance could be very cartoon-like, as some of the older versions of that first came out, or it can be a high-quality 3D digital image that manages the dialogue. The next slide, please. Now, the virtual assistants have evolved over time. We count them currently in about 6 different generations of assistants. If we look at the user interface, some of the first versions had a very, very primitive cartoon-type image. They could not deliver high quality or accurate results. Modern day, we see a virtual assistant with high quality imagery. We see 3D often coming to the fore. We see a moving video-like rendered image with lip syncing and control and emotion detecting on the face. If we look at some of the data sources, initially the virtual assistant had 0 support from any external data. The modern day virtual assistant integrates not only to its internal knowledge base, into its internal transactional systems, but it will also integrate into some external sources for content and information. The modern virtual assistant can also take a discussion that starts in one channel and move it across to another channel. It has that ability to not only react in text, but also the ability to react in speech. If we move to the next slide, please. So looking at a few examples of the virtual assistant, we can see on the left-hand side there one of the early examples. We call him old Faceless Frank, Faceless Frank from MSN. Many years ago, even prior to that, I'm sure quite a few of you will remember Windows 3.1. You'll remember the paperclip, the professor, the bouncing ball that provided help at an appropriate time. Well, those are some of the very early virtual assistants. As time progressed, we can see a humanoid type interface starting to emerge. We see the Etihad Airways virtual assistant, which is really a great example of a representation of the persona of the business. It is an air hostess with the typical Etihad Airways uniform on. If you look at Starwoods, you will see the reception or the virtual assistant having the form and the uniform of a receptionist. As we move on, ThyssenKrupp for some financial advice, you will expect a professional gentleman with a suit and a tie, all the way to our modern virtual assistant that is on the mobile device. Now, what is important is that some virtual assistants can carry across traits from an adjacent generation. So, for example, if we take a generation 5, it can carry over some of the traits from a generation 4. We talk about cross-generational. We will not often see a virtual assistant that can only use text, but that is highly accurate in its delivery of content. So multi-generation crossovers we don't often see, but these lines are slightly blurred as we move to the higher and the increasing generations. The ability to not only provide context-based information, but also to provide real-time transactional information and content. If we move to the next slide, some examples of cross-generational virtual assistants. Now, on the right-hand side of the picture there, you'll see two cartoon-type characters, one for Vodafone, the cartoon bot at the bottom. Now, these have been generated on purpose. This is the persona that the organization wants to represent. If you look at Geico, they have a very well-known character to represent the organization. If we look at Michelin, the Michelin Man, the tire, there's a very defined cartoon-type character that people can relate to. So that persona is the representation, the user interface that customers engage with right up front when they meet the virtual assistant for the first time on that website. On the top left-hand side, we see a very high quality image. In this instance, the image is primarily engaged with via text, and it delivers speech-based responses. So we're starting to see that cross-generational. At the bottom in the middle, we see the call center cartoon-type character. Here we've got a highly accurate content in the background, but they still have a non-moving GIF in the front end that represents the organization. As they implement, as they pilot, and as this organization becomes a lot more sophisticated. If we move to the next slide, we can see that we divide the virtual assistant into 4 different categories. First, we look at web-based assistants. Now, web-based assistants can either provide and support the individual. You can book meetings in your diary. You can find your closest pub, a pharmacy, a train station, but it is all personalized information. There is little to no transactional integration. Now, what we mean with transactional integration is the ability to integrate with an organization's back-end systems. The e-commerce system to be able to perform a buying transaction. The online booking system of a travel agent to be able to perform a booking transaction. Online banking to be able to do funds transfer and display funds balances. That ability does not exist on the personal level of virtual assistants. And then there's the enterprise virtual assistant. So if we look at the web, enterprise, there is eGain, and I'm sure you've read a lot in the press lately about IBM's Watson, which will have the ability to integrate into your transactional system. So you can, via the voice, say, Mr. Virtual Assistant, what is the balance in my account? I would like to transfer $100 from my current account to my savings account. And by the way, can you please give $200 of airtime, prepaid airtime to my son? So putting all that verbal instructions into a transaction interface, that's when we talk about the enterprise virtual assistant. At the bottom, we find virtual assistants that's only and exclusively and purely focused on the mobile device. Siri, well-known example. Siri can provide you with a huge amount of entertainment, a huge amount of contextual data. It knows where you are, except in some foreign countries where Siri does not have localized data, but it can entertain you with jokes. Please, Siri, tell me a joke. But what it cannot do is integrate with any transactional systems. There's no open APIs. There's no way to link Siri to your bank account and say, transfer that $100 from my current account to my savings account, please, Siri. She can't. On the other hand, if we look at mobile solutions such as eGain or the Spanish-based solutions such as Sherpa, it has the ability to perform not only informational content, provide not only informational content, but it also has the ability to perform transactional-based activities. Please transfer that $100 from my current account to my savings account. So if we have the next slide, please. So I wish I could be in the same room as all of you. I could ask you to put your hands up, so maybe virtual hands up. First question, who is familiar with this screen? This big blank space that we find on every one of your organizational websites that says, type your question here. How many of you like this big blank space? I'm sure there will not be many hands up. Yet, it is the standard way in which most organizations deliver content to the customers. This blank space, type your question here. Very entertaining. Maybe not. The virtual assistant has the ability to throw all this traditional thinking. Oh, we've got a quick survey. Thank you. So select one of these. Who finds this user-friendly? This screen that we have up here. You do find it user-friendly or you don't find it user-friendly? And we'll get some poll results. Currently we're seeing 59% of people not finding it very friendly. I'm surprised it's not more people that don't find it very friendly, but yet it is the primary interface that we provide our customers with. Are we moving through to 60% of the group that's not finding it very friendly? Let's then see what it could look like if we overlay a virtual assistant. With the next slide, please. So looking at an alternative way of presenting that content, we can now see a completely different approach to delivering content through to the customer. We still have the FAQ box, but now it is highly contextualized. We can offer content around returns. We can offer content around shipping. But when this screen opened, the first thing that your eyes were drawn to was the face, the character on the bottom right-hand side. It is natural human behavior to look at and search out eyes. Psychology shows us that a friendly face invokes a positive response. It is now becoming enticing. You will now typically spend a lot more time on this website trying to find a question, or trying to find an answer to your question. We find that the duration that people stay on a website increases by 3 to 4-fold as soon as we deploy a virtual assistant. We refer to that as creating stickiness. But I'll come back to stickiness. What the virtual assistant does allow us to provide is a great ability to capture the customer's attention, to retain their attention. And as many of you know or have read the very popular research around the first 20 to 30 seconds is all that we have to capture and hold a customer's attention when they browse to your website. With the virtual assistant, that extends dramatically. Next slide, please. So not only are we able to create that experience on the web, but we can also create the exact same experience on the mobile device. It is equally as effective. Now, here is another great benefit. When we deploy that ability to answer, engage with the customer on the website, and the same ability to engage with the customer on the mobile, we are starting to see that consistency across all the various channels. If a customer phones in, they get a specific answer. If they go to the website, they get the same answer. If they move to the mobile device, they get exactly the same answer. So creating consistency of experience, whether you are on web or whether you're on the mobile, is a huge benefit. Again, and immediately the customer can look at the figure and they can become familiar with the image that's being represented within the figure. Let's move to the next slide, please. So far, I've spoken mostly about the front end, the interface. So let's look at some real live benefits, some case studies. First of all, if we talk about a category of engagement, a huge cosmetics manufacturer, they use the virtual assistant to train and educate the sales staff on all the new products and the policies and procedures within the organization. So now we're not using the virtual assistant exclusively for external interaction. We're also using it for internal interaction. We often see this virtual assistant internal interaction being hugely beneficial, more beneficial, as opposed to all those investments that has typically been made in e-learning initiatives. One of the biggest challenges of those e-learning initiatives is always getting the employees to actually use them. Well, with the virtual assistant, we're making it fun. Let's look at some more examples, some more case studies. Telco. Now, what the telco organization used the virtual assistant for is for customer service inquiries. In this instance, they've managed to increase up to 66% the number of inquiries that are being handled through the virtual assistant. What they've also managed to do is handle a lot more interactions through using of the virtual assistant and not employing additional people, as in the bank's case. Let's look at the Japanese bank, increasing loyalty because people stay on the site longer. A multinational organization using the virtual assistant in multiple different languages to educate people. It's incredibly easy to translate text text-based content into multiple different languages, suddenly giving you that ability to service in countries where you traditionally were not servicing. The virtual assistant has a great effect on customer satisfaction ratings. If we move to the next slide, please. But there's one huge challenge in the back end. I spoke about the front end. I spoke about the graphical image. There's a very big challenge on the back end. And that is the ability to actually answer the question. You can have the greatest and best and most highest quality character and imagery on the front end. If you are not able to answer the question accurately, it's useless. Now, I want to introduce to you a new key performance indicator, the new KPI. And alongside that new KPI, I want to introduce a new SLA that you will be focusing on as you're going down the path of deploying your virtual assistant. First of all, that KPI is called relevance of response. Now, in the web world, relevance of response is very similar to first call resolution in the voice world. Relevance of response is not how often an answer was given. It is not Google that will give you 5, 10 pages of answers. By the way, virtual hands up. Whoever goes to page number 2 on Google? I'm sure there'll be very few people. When we're focusing on delivering a content through that virtual assistant, we need to focus on the SLA. And that says 85% or more of that answers, of that content, must be relevant to the question that was asked. We do not want to provide the customer with lengthy lists of responses and then request them to search for the correct one. We should be measuring the accuracy of that response, the relevancy of that response, and at best, only deliver one answer, the single right answer. If we do not have that, we can extend up to a maximum of about 3 answers, but don't go much beyond that. So the KPI is relevance of response. We need to focus in delivering those content, in delivering that content via the virtual assistant on 85% or more accuracy. In your contact center, if you have a service level agreement that says our first call resolution should be 90%, then you should place the same first call resolution SLA onto your virtual assistant. But it's very difficult to achieve. And there's only one secret sauce that allows us to achieve the high relevance of response. If we can move to the next slide, please. And that secret sauce is called knowledge. Coming back to the knowledge navigator, that knowledge is incredibly important. It's the most important part of the virtual assistant. Now, there are 5 different categories of knowledge. We start with corporate knowledge, which is really the knowledge of the ATs, those policies and procedures, that stuff that becomes shelfware so quickly. Next, we talk about agent knowledge. Now, the agents have the agent knowledge is all that content and information that the agent needs in order to answer the question from the customer. The agent knowledge quite often can be different to customer knowledge. So customer knowledge is when a customer goes onto a website, they will receive a response. Let's take an example. The customer is on a banking site. They say, what is the best mortgage rate for a loan of $200,000? If that customer has not been authenticated, just a general browser arriving at the website, they might receive an answer. But now they log on, they authenticate, they are behind the firewall, the customer is busy with an online banking transaction, and now they ask the same question. What is the best mortgage rate for a $200,000 loan? The customer will highly likely receive a different answer because they could be a high-profile customer. They could have many other investments. There's a bigger picture to consider. There might be in a certain geography or of a certain risk category. So the answer might differ, similar to the agent knowledge and the customer knowledge that differs. And then we have partner knowledge. I often see being used in the life insurance business, where you have brokers or distributors on selling insurance. In the manufacturing world, we've got lots of various manufacturers making small parts towards a bigger picture. And then we have social knowledge. So let's put the front end and the back end together. At the front end, we have the avatar, the virtual, the image, the character. The character can be cartoon-based. It can be a high-quality video image based in the Generation 6. Behind that character, behind that corporate persona, sits a deep, well-structured knowledge base. That knowledge base has the ability to provide a highly accurate, highly relevant of response. Very few, 2 or 3 answers, but the single right answer through that virtual assistant to the customer. But there's more. Let's move to the next slide, please. The virtual assistant must not be seen as a separate entity, as a standalone or free-ranging or free-roaming agent. The virtual assistant must be seen as part of a bigger customer service strategy, or as we would like to call it, part of the bigger digital care strategy. If we look at the left-hand side of the picture, typically what most organizations already have in place is voice care, the contact center. We can phone into that contact center. We can have great or some very poor experiences, but we are providing a voice care. Most companies have invested in the transactional care or self-service, online banking, e-commerce, buying and ordering products, travel and tourism. You can book your flights, where a customer will authenticate and perform a transaction with the back-end system. Where many organizations are challenged in their interaction with the customer is on the web care side. Web chat is a very, very popular channel, and typically one of the first channels we see being deployed. Alongside web chat, we can have an email response for automatically answering those questions, collaborative browsing, screen sharing, video chat, social engagement, and then we also see virtual assistants. So when we look at the virtual assistant, it is not a standalone piece of technology. It's not something that hangs onto something else. It is part and parcel of your core customer service enterprise application. The best way is to engage with your existing customer service provider, vendor, and use their virtual assistant, because, as I said, you need to integrate that virtual assistant with the knowledge base, which is highly likely already being used by your customer service agents in the contact center, which is highly likely being used by your partners out there, or third parties, or being used on a mobile device. So look at the virtual assistant as an integral part of your bigger customer services strategy. It can engage with the transactional systems, book a flight for me tomorrow from New York to San Francisco for myself and my 4-year-old son. So now the flight booking system will know I'm talking about a child under a certain age. It knows from where to where I want to travel. It knows the date, because I said tomorrow. It can understand that sentence. It can engage with the transactional system. It can engage with the knowledge, and it can perform that interaction. So very importantly, look at that transactional system. Next slide, please. Look at the virtual assistant as part and parcel of a very tight integration of the bigger customer service picture. Now, that virtual assistant is not always, will not always have all the answers. It will run out of content. It is impossible to script every single question in the universe. And that is where the third component of integration. The first is being your transactional systems. The second is being your knowledge base. And the third component of integration is with your existing interaction channels. We need a very tight integration for success. Can we have the next slide, please? Perfect. So where we have the virtual assistant that runs out of an answer, we can't leave the customer hanging. What we need to do is to be able to transfer that interaction to a real live agent. So imagine the scenario. The customer asked a question, the virtual assistant provided a response. The response does not reach the 85% relevancy. Now the correct and the best practice is to tell the customer, hey, Mr. Customer, would it be okay if I transfer it to an agent for a web chat? We do not want to cross channels. We don't want to move from a text-based interaction to a phone-based interaction. We want to keep the customer in that channel. So moving from a virtual assistant, which is on the web or on the mobile device, to a text-based web chat activity is a fantastic way of delivering the creating continuity. The virtual assistant have got some great selling points. It delivers the single right answer. It creates stickiness. It reduces the cost of the transaction. So if we take a typical phone call and we look at statistics, we'll see that a phone call is in between the $20 to about $35 for a phone call. However, if we look at a web chat session, now we have a chat agent that can potentially deal with multiple simultaneous customers. It is still a human-based interaction, but because of the multi-streaming of interactions, we can reduce the cost of that interaction to the $15, maybe $12 to $20 range. When we start moving to the virtual assistant, it is an automated interaction. So our costs typically reside in the technology that's being deployed, and it resides in the management and maintenance of the knowledge base and the interfaces. Now we're starting to look at a $3 to a $5 or $3 to an $8 cost per interaction. So it is a great business case to move from a $30 voice call to a $3 virtual assistant interaction. If the virtual assistant cannot provide the information, we can always upscale. We can even offer a video call from the agent outbound. But as you saw in the previous business cases, many companies are in fact streaming huge volumes of interactions through the virtual assistant. It never takes leave. It doesn't get sick. Next slide, please. Let's focus on stickiness. Customers also used to typing their question into that blank space. Type your question here. They get highly excited when we provide them with an alternative interface. So initially, the virtual assistant, with the character, with the representation, the persona of the enterprise, creates interest. People stay longer, they linger longer. Now, if we link that virtual assistant to only providing accurate content, where people can get the answers the first time around, they will much rather engage and receive that content in the channels that they are in, as opposed to halfway through an e-commerce shopping basket, now phoning the call center, because they want to know how many colors the product comes in. The virtual assistant entertains. The virtual assistant, through its entertainment, introduces a component of gamification. And I'll talk a little bit about gamification at the end of this discussion. It adds context. It adds intent. It can understand intent. It can provide upselling. We're finding that there's a huge reduction in abandoned shopping carts as soon as you add the virtual assistant into the checkout counter. Because now humans are used to dealing with humans. They can engage with that face. You can put the face back in front of the customer. The customer can ask questions. How many colors does this product come in? I would like to do a change. Where's your closest store? I can receive all the content instantly. And if you're enabled with voice, it's all voice enabled. There's two great examples on the slide, URLs, one for Vodafone, one for GoArmy. Go and have a look at those URLs once the session is finished for some great examples of how the virtual assistants work and how they create stickiness on the website, allowing people to stay longer. Next slide, please. Moving back to that stickiness. Now imagine you're on the checkout counter and you have a question through the virtual assistant popping up, monitoring your behavior, saying, oh, I see you're actually hesitating, you're not moving to the checkout counter. Are you having second thoughts? Is there some information you're missing? What content can I deliver to you? The virtual assistant can even play a short video clips in demonstrating the product that's been in the shopping basket. It can offer incentives, rewards, again a component of gamification, rewards to the shopper for checking out now. It can do that through text, or it can do that highly effectively through speech. Next slide, please. So there are 7 key reasons why organizations buy virtual assistants, why they go down this path. And the very first reason is all about cost. The virtual assistant's ability to hugely reduce the cost of servicing, providing a lot more channels that the customer can engage you in, entering new markets, new geographies, dealing in different languages, providing 24/7 services, not having to employ people to stay in office throughout the night, and increasing the ability to sell, upsell, cross-sell, and reduce abandoned shopping carts. Now, behind each one of those, we've got a very detailed and fairly in-depth business case. So we can engage with further discussions down the path. But those are the top key reasons why people deploy virtual assistants. Next slide, please. As we're moving into the last few. However, when you do go out on looking at virtual assistants, there are 6 key things, 6 must-haves when you're considering the various providers. The first one is conversation. It is not an instruction. It is not keywords that you engage with. It's a conversation. The virtual assistant must be able to have a natural dialogue. It must be able to integrate into your knowledge base. It must be able to integrate into your transactional systems. It must be able to transfer interaction between channels. Escalate that discussion from a virtual assistant only to a virtual assistant and chat. The administration must be really easy. The non-negotiable, there must be mobile interface, because we've seen so much traffic. In fact, we're seeing so much traffic moving to the mobile device. In fact, in 2011, mobile sales outstripped desktop and PC sales. And the user interface must be of a high quality and high content. Next slide, please. A few trends in addition to those must-haves as we're moving forward into the future world of virtual assistants. We're finding increasingly that speech is the new keyboard. If you do not have speech as a virtual assistant provider, you are really right at the back of the queue. Speech is the new keyboard. We need to be able to deal in multiple languages via speech, input and output. People are so used to interacting and with the mobile device via speech that it's becoming a non-negotiable. Video, it is really cool. I've seen some great cases where the virtual assistant is engaged with the customer. They reach the end of their 85%. They do not have any more accurate answers. And rather than offer a web chat interaction, they in fact offer a video chat interaction. The customer does not necessarily have to have a camera, but the agent gets onto video. So you maintain that principle of placing the face in front of the customer. Location awareness, being able to offer that $2 discount as you walk past the store. Social knowledge, being able to engage in increasing in social communities, and sales is a key focus of the future virtual assistant. Moving towards the close, let's touch again on gamification. Looking at the trend graph there from Google Trends, we saw a couple of years ago, nobody even knew about the term gamification. Currently, we see thousands of searches on the term, people trying to understand what it is, starting to deploy gamification type technologies. Gamification is really about taking game mechanics and bringing that into the mainstream world. There are two key components of gamification. If we do the next slide, please. There are two key principles of gamification. The first key principle is that of representation. For all those gamers on the line, the most popular games are first-person games. Whether you're on the Wii platform, on the Xbox platform, on the PlayStation platform, just on the PC platform, you will always typically pick a character to represent. And that is one of the key principles that virtual assistants play on. That ability to, through a user interface, either high quality graphics or more lower quality moving GIF image, represent the corporate persona. Any human moving to or navigating to a website, first and foremost, look at the face, and then they start engaging. They get that first happiness feeling, that representation, then they create the stickiness. So that first principle of gamification is one of representation. You're representing your organization through that persona. And the second key principle of gamification is reward. You reward the customer with discounts, with accurate answers. You reward the customers with content and information. Next slide, please. And you provide the customer with an ability to reference to something that is familiar to them. Just quickly waiting for that slide to change. So, a last thought, our last slide. If we can move to this, to the last slide. What is the difference? What is the difference between the potato and the sponge? Well, it has a character. It has something that you can recognize. It has eyes, something you relate to, something that pops up. There is a persona. There is an interaction. Let's move away from that blank space. Let's move away from that bland potato, that dull sponge. Let's move to the SpongeBob, Mr. Potato Head. Let's create a persona. Let's put the face in front of the customer. Not only will you find that people stay longer, that they engage with you more, but by delivering highly accurate responses, you will immediately see your satisfaction levels increase dramatically. Last slide. That is all from me. I hope you enjoyed our journey through the world of virtual assistants. We have about 5 minutes left, and I'm sure there's been some questions that have come through that chat box. So over to the questions.
Thank you again, Johan. That was really interesting, and we apologize for the latency in the slides. It looks like we're having a bit of a technical issue with GoTo. I have some people viewing here, and I see there's a difference in when they're appearing. But we did record the session, and you'll all be receiving a recording as well. So a few questions that came through. For example, when would you recommend a cartoon versus a rendered image, etc., for virtual assistant?
All right. There's been a test a couple of years ago where multiple people were sampled on the creepiness of a character. When does a graphical character become creepy or not? This study was done in the late 90s, and many people at that time said a character becomes creepy the more realistic it becomes. And now 2 years ago, the study was repeated by De Vrije University in Holland. They did a fairly big study, and they basically asked the same question. They compared cartoon type interfaces with realistic humanoid type interfaces, and 80% of the people participating in the study from around the world preferred to choose the realistic user image, high quality graphical image. I think people have grown up through the years as they expect a high quality image coming from their mobile, their web type device, and we're seeing that in the past there's been a huge amount of cartoon type characters deployed, but the modern virtual assistant is almost exclusively only humanoid. There's one exception, and that exception is if your corporate persona is that of a cartoon type character. BT Games, a large games reseller, Dunlop Man, Geico, many others that use cartoon type characters stick with those that's familiar to the organization. But alternatively, the popularity is swinging heavily towards high quality graphical images.
Thank you, Johan. Another question is it possible to have the virtual assistant leverage existing knowledge bases?
You know, the short answer is yes. However, there's a curveball. Very few existing knowledge bases have got the ability to deliver highly accurate content.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at the content, highly accurate content is delivered through search. Let's face it, it boils down to search. And there are 5 types of search very quickly. Keyword search, most basic, natural language search, a little bit more up there, semantic understanding, decision trees. Now there are very few existing knowledge bases that have got all 5 levels of search. So yes, a virtual assistant can be linked to an existing knowledge base. However, the level of accuracy could be, and I'm saying could be, depending on what product you've got, could be limited. On the other hand, if you go for a new modern day product where the virtual assistant comes pre-integrated with the knowledge base, it is already highly accurate and then becomes a lot easier.
Right. We do have a bunch of questions that came through, and we'll get to them after the session as well. So I have time for one last question.
All right. Make it a good one.
Why, in your opinion, is virtual assistant better than search, than simply search? We saw some slides that touched on that. But
yeah, so in one short answer, it creates stickiness.
Yeah.
Virtual assistants cause people to stay. That's really the bottom line. Linked with a highly accurate answer, linked with the entertainment factor of gamification and rewards, The short answer is virtual assistants have been proven time and time again to cause people to stay. They can relate to that face. You're putting a face in front of the customer. You're giving them answers. They can relate to it a lot easier than that blank space that says, type your question here. And then you end up with 20 or 30 responses that the individual must sift through. Stickiness, that's the answer.
Thank you, Johan, and thanks for a really great webinar, very informative. Thanks again for everybody for joining us today. Just to remind you, next week, same time, we'll be having one more webinar on knowledge, also with Johan. I'll also be emailing all of you a recording of this webinar, and we'll collaborate with Johan in answering the rest of the questions and sharing the answers with everybody as well. Again, thank you all for listening and taking part today, and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.